Banned from my own daughter's wedding. No seat and no voice. Until the venue's programs, logs, and one quiet sentence at the aisle refused his version of the truth. The message arrived with a neat subject line and a cold center. I was not invited to my daughter's wedding. My name was missing from the rehearsal schedule. My new husband was labeled a problem. The reason given was a single sentence about me trying to replace her father. It landed like a stamp on a file that I stood in a quiet kitchen and looked at the years that had brought me here. The house we kept when the bills swelled. The hours I spent learning forms with small boxes and smaller lines. The meetings where I signed papers to keep collectors away from my child's room. None of that fit the story I was being handed now. Her father had always preferred bright stories over hard numbers. He called late fees a phase. He called final notices a mix-up. By the end, I learned how to sort envelopes by threat level and smile in front of my daughter so her world didn't tilt. When we finally split, I took the stack of debt and the list of dates and moved forward without speeches. Now I was a headline in a family drama I had not written. Cheater. Replacement. Unwelcome. The words looked simple from a distance and heavy up close. I opened the file box that lives on the top shelf of my closet. Inside was a paper spine of our history. Loans. Notices. Receipts. A guardianship packet with the corners worn thin from nervous thumbs that I placed the papers in order on the table. The past made a clean line when I let it. Calls I took. Payments I made. A house I held together with planning and patience. A signature from the day I made legal space around my daughter when things at her father's address slid out of control. I never told her the details. I didn't want her teenage years to taste like paperwork. The wedding was 3 weeks away and already full of photos of dresses and flowers and a dance floor that could fit a small town. My absence would be a blank space in the pictures and a loud one in the comments. I did not want a scene. I wanted the truth set where it belonged, steady and quiet, the way a beam belongs under a roof. That I stacked the documents into folders with simple labels. Debt trail. House saves. School fees covered. Guardianship orders. I added a short timeline in plain words. Not a defense. Not an attack. Only what happened, when it happened, and what it cost to keep a child's life in one piece. I held the stack and felt a kind of peace that has nothing to do with forgiveness and everything to do with facts. I would not argue in a bridal suite. I would not corner my child between a veil and a vow. The conversation would happen before the aisle and away from cameras. If she needed the story of her father, she would have it from paper, not pain. If she did not want it, I would leave the folder with someone who could keep it safe until her world asked for it later. I looked at the seat chart she had posted online. Across the bride's side, a neat row carried his family names. My square was blank. Blank is quiet, but it is also space that can hold the truth. I slid the folders into a bag and wrote a note on the first page. For when you are ready to see the weight your mother carried, so you didn't have to dot. I cleared the table and laid the years edge to edge. Bank letters with careful language that hides urgency. Notices printed on thin paper that curl at the corners. Receipts with ink rubbed pale from writing in my wallet. Each slip belonged to a day my daughter never had to fear the knock on the door. The first stack told the story of a house that should not have survived. Late fees dressed up as reminders. Promises from her father that never reached the branch. I matched each letter with a payment stub and a date stamp from the counter where the clerk knew my name. The pattern was simple. I showed up, the roof stayed put. The second stack carried school terms and field trips that would have vanished without quiet transfers. Enrollment sheets with balances marked paid. Notes from offices that never needed to call our home because I sat on plastic chairs and signed what kept her path smooth. She picked electives, and I picked up the totals behind the glass. At the bottom sat the file that changed our orbit. A guardianship packet that gave me the right to draw a clear border when her father's address turned into a place of noise and strangers. The forms looked dry, but they built a fence around a child who needed sleep more than drama. When collectors called his number, they met a wall that kept them from hers. I added printouts from the day I closed joint accounts and opened one that did not leak. The statements showed steady deposits and careful withdrawals, a life measured and kept safe. There was no romance in the columns, only a record of a mother bending a world into shape so a girl could walk without looking down. I wrote a single page that linked it all. House steady, school stable, calls redirected, quiet made on purpose. I made sure the words were calm and plain. No blame, no rescue myths, only evidence that love sometimes looks like chairs in offices and signatures in small boxes that let a teenager think about dresses instead of past due stamps. Her father's story had always favored grand gestures and soft light. The paper told the story of mornings at windows waiting for branches to open, of afternoons and lines with a number on a screen, of nights when I did the math twice so the fridge stayed full and the power never blinked. You do not post this part. You just keep it in a folder that fits in a bag. I slid the pages into clear sleeves and labeled the spine with a word she could accept: context. The wedding would celebrate a new family, but it had grown from a foundation I poured alone. If she wanted to know why I stood where I stood, the answer was on this table, ink on paper. Weight you can feel in your hands. I closed the binder and checked the rehearsal address she had sent to everyone but me. The gate had a desk for vendors and a clipboard for deliveries. A binder counts as both when it has the right name on the cover. I wrote her full name in neat letters and set the alarm for a morning that would not wait for permission. I could see the back of the file box, a sealed envelope caught against my wrist. The handwriting on the front was her grandmother's, the kind that does not rush. It had rested there since a winter afternoon when we packed a closet and kept a single promise. The seal was unbroken. My hand was not. The envelope held its shape like a small brick of time. The paper was thick and cool, the seal older than my new life and younger than the memories that made it necessary. I broke the seam and slid out a folded page that smelled faintly of cedar and starch. The handwriting was steady, each line resting on the next like steps that had been measured in advance. The first paragraph named what no one had been willing to say out loud. It set dates beside events I remembered through fog. It listed visits that never matched the stories told at the table. It sketched a map of choices that pulled our house toward collapse, then anchored the map with receipts and notes kept for years. The tone was gentle without being soft. It left no room for doubt and no need for anger. Midway through the letter, a single sentence stood alone. It asked me to wait to share this truth until our daughter had a place of her own. It said that stability matters more than clearing a record. It was the kind of instruction only a person who had carried families knows how to write. She must have sealed the envelope in a kitchen like mine, in a quiet that matched mine. While thinking about a child who deserved mornings that felt ordinary, the bottom. A small list of attachments was noted in careful script. A photocopy of a policy that covered a late mortgage payment. A handwritten log of calls placed to stop letters from turning into visits. A transfer slip that kept utilities from blinking in winter. I checked the file box and found a thin packet tucked behind the envelope, just as the list promised. I had been holding a piece of scaffolding without knowing it that I placed the letter at the front of the binder under a clear sleeve. The binder changed weight in my hands. It was no longer only mine. It belonged to the line of steady people behind me who closed doors gently, kept keys where children could not reach them, and moved money in quiet arcs that made small lives feel safe. The letter gave the paper trail a voice that did not waver. The rehearsal venue sat on a hill behind a wide gate. It took vendors in the morning and deliveries in the afternoon. A binder could be both when labeled with the right words. I printed a cover page with my daughter's full name and the simple word context underneath. It was not a plea and not a warning. It was a sign placed on a door for the person it belongs to. My plan needed stages that prevented spectacle. First, the binder would be logged at the gate like any other package. Second, a sealed note would be attached that offered a time and a quiet place for reading, not a corner during chaos. Third, a secondary copy would travel to a safe pair of hands in case the first never reached her. Redundancy turns luck into purpose. I walked the route on a map and measured how long each step might take. Parking by the lower lot. Desk at the gate. Office near the loading dock where names are checked and clipboards stack into neat towers. A bench under a fig tree that offered shade for someone who might need a minute after reading the first page. Every part of the plan favored stillness and light. The two conditions where truth can exist without performance. I packed the binder, the grandmother's letter, and the duplicate set into separate sleeves. The duplicate went into a plain envelope with a neutral label for a person who manages documents at the venue. The original went into my bag beside a small notebook with a single line written at the top. Facts can carry themselves if given a straight path. The day before the rehearsal, I called the bank branch where I had signed so many papers. A clerk confirmed the stamped copies were still valid. I visited the office that had handled the guardianship and obtained a fresh certification page with a new date. The binder grew a spine that would hold under questions. Nothing in it asked for belief. Everything in it offered proof. Sunset. I stood in the doorway of the spare room where my daughter used to keep her costumes and school projects. The light lifted dust into soft gold and made the air look heavy. I realized I had been practicing for this day for years without naming it. You do not plan to be disinvited. You plan to be steady when it happens. That steadiness was sitting in a bag by the door, quiet and ready. I set an early alarm and laid out a simple outfit that would not draw attention. The work in front of me did not need flair. It needed calm steps and a desk where a name could be written in a ledger without comment. I went to bed with the same small prayer I used on hard months. Let the right things meet the right hands without noise. I reached the hill while the air was still cool and the lot sat open like a blank page. The gate desk held a ledger and a small stack of badges. I wrote my daughter's name on the cover sheet, slid the binder forward, and watched the clerk stamp the intake line with a calm wrist. Paper makes a sound when it enters a system. It is a soft click that means the story now has a shelf. The label on the spine read her name and the single word she could accept. The sealed note faced inward so wandering eyes would meet only a blank square. The grandmother's letter sat under the clear sleeve like steady light under glass. The clerk logged the package and placed it in a plastic crate with other deliveries bound for the office near the dock. A copy of the receipt slid back across the counter into my hand. Redundancy mattered more than good faith. I walked the side path to the service office where documents pass through quiet hands. The coordinator took the duplicate envelope for safekeeping and wrote a short note on a card that matches bags and seating lists. If the first binder missed its mark, this one would wait behind a door that opens when chaos settles. I measured the route the original would take. Desk to office, office to coordinator, coordinator to the folder table near the rehearsal schedule. The fig tree bench sat in view of that table without being part of it. I pictured my daughter in that shade with the binder open to the page that turned heavy things into still ones. The image steadied my breathing. Small frictions began. A new vendor truck blocked the dock. A schedule card moved from one board to another. The crate with deliveries sat on top of a rolling cart instead of a counter. The binder shifted from view to the middle of the stack. Patterns hide in tiny changes. I stood back and let the system settle around them. I kept my hands busy with simple work. I wrote a one-page index for the binder's first section on a clean card and placed it under the clear sleeve of the duplicate. House steady. School stable. Calls redirected. Quiet made on purpose. The same lines from my kitchen table now fit in a space a person could read in a breath. The clerk returned from the dock with fresh ink on a form and a clipped tone that comes from too many moving parts. The crate rolled out of sight toward the office. The ledger stamped again with a time mark for transfers. The steps I planned held. The binder moved without me, the way truth should move when it has a spine. I sat by the fig tree and watched the rehearsal space wake. Florists tested heights with stems. Chairs scraped into neat rows. Staff rehearsed small chores that make big days look easy. The room learned its shape by inches. I tracked the door where the office releases materials and the table where they land. Waiting is hard work when you have spent years keeping motion hidden. I let the branches make shade and trusted the stamp on the receipt in my pocket. Noise rose from the lower lot like a slow tide. The father's car carried a shine that liked attention. His people moved with quick hands and loud plans. Boxes arrived that did not belong to the official list. A name badge appeared on a chest that had not checked in at the desk. Wind pushed the scent of cut flowers into something sharp. Big energy wants to fill every corner. Paper does not argue. Paper sits and holds. A coordinator crossed the path with a clear sleeve held like a tray. The binder's cover peeked out beneath a stack of place cards and seating charts. The sleeve stopped at the right table, and a hand pointed to the fig tree where a bride often rests between tasks. The path was real. The space was ready. Only one thing could pull it off course. The father's assistant stepped into the lane with a list that did not match the ledger. The crate paused. The sleeve hovered. A new hand tried to redirect the stack toward a private office. The moment was small and almost quiet. It was also the fork where a story either reaches the person it belongs to or vanishes into someone else's room. I moved once, only as far as the coordinator's desk. The receipt met the ledger. The intake stamp matched the transfer stamp. The signatures lined up like rails. Systems like pairs. The clerk's eyes traced the line from the gate to the office to the table. The sleeve resumed its route, steady and unhurried, away from the assistant's hand and toward the place under the fig tree. The rehearsal door opened, and a hush passed through the crew the way a breeze moves across tall grass. The binder rested where I had pictured it. The shade made the plastic glow. The page with the grandmother's letter faced up. A person I love would either sit there and turn it, or she would walk past it and let it wait. Both choices were hers. My part was to make the path straight and the light honest. From the fig trees, shade the room unfolded like a slow rehearsal. The binder lay where light turned plastic to glass. Place cards fanned out beside it. A breeze moved the sleeve a finger's width and set the page with the grandmother's letter alive for a second. Then the countercurrent began. The father's crowd moved in waves that swallowed edges. Extra boxes appeared with labels that did not match the vendor ledger. A clipboard with a fresh logo hovered at the wrong tables. A stack of revised seating prints arrived that none of the staff had stamped. Noise pressed into quiet corners and made the official path feel thin. The assistant returned with a new tote and a practiced route that looped around desks instead of passing them. The tote opened near the fig tree and swallowed stray items the way a net scoops drift. Programs, pens, 2 stray name badges. A hand hovered over the clear sleeve as if it were just another stray. The touch did not land. A stamped receipt on the table repelled it like a magnet turned the wrong way. Small attempts kept coming. A replacement schedule appeared in the rehearsal hall with times shifted by wide margins. A courier label with no origin stickered a crate that had already been logged. A coordinator's note vanished from a stand and reappeared on a cart where no one would see it. The pattern was familiar. Flood the space until trails blur, then redirect. I held steady and made my own small moves. The duplicate envelope with the index card sat behind a neutral door, safe. A third copy of the index slid under the clear sleeve of the original when the breeze lifted the edge. The one-page summary read in a breath and anchored the binder against words louder than paper. House steady. School stable. Calls redirected. Quiet made on purpose. Ink does not argue. It simply waits for eyes. The rehearsal group reached the fig tree in a tide that broke into smaller eddies. Flowers brushed past plastic. Fabrics whispered against leaves. Laughter drew a line and then bent away. The binder stayed in its square of shade. A photographer framed the tree in a test shot and caught the sleeve by accident. Light fixed the object into the day whether anyone read it or not. A new narrative leaked from the far end of the hall and seeped toward the benches. It said a binder had arrived with threats. It said a mother had sent demands. The story grew legs without proof. It ran fast and loud because loud feels true when you are busy. I held the receipt in my pocket and the certified page in the spine and let the rumor tire itself out against paper that had names and stamps and dates. 2 staffers compared ledgers and found the missing note that had been moved. They returned it to the stand without commentary. A florist asked for the coordinator by name and reset the flow around the door to the office. The crate with deliveries made its second pass toward the central table, now clear. The room learned its shape again. Systems like rails. Once aligned, they carry loads without permission. The father himself arrived with a shine that turned heads. He followed the assistant's loop and tried the net's trick with presence alone. The binder's cover did not flinch. The grandmother's letter stayed under glass. The page with the index faced up like a calm palm in the middle of a crowd. A photographer lifted a lens, and the moment froze into a frame that would live longer than noise. A hand I knew moved into the shade. It was smaller than mine and still wore a thin mark where a school ring used to sit. It rested on the plastic without lifting it. The light pressed through the sleeve and lit the page below. The hand did not tremble. The moment did. A life can bend on contact with a single sentence that refuses to be loud. The tote changed directions then, empty hands finding new tasks. The clipboard left the wrong table and returned to the right. The revised prints folded back into a box. Big energy does not know what to do with paper that refuses the stage. It withdraws and looks for softer targets. The binder did not move. The shade held by late afternoon. The rehearsal call ushered most bodies inside. The fig tree kept its quiet circle. The sleeve bore a new faint smudge where a thumb had rested. The corner of the letter showed a crease that had not been there in the morning. The index card sat a fraction askew as if read and returned in a hurry. The path had been walked by the only person who mattered. I left my bench without leaving my place in the system. The duplicate stayed behind a door that knows how to keep things. The receipt stayed in my pocket. A copy of the one-page summary traveled to a folder with the coordinator's name in case anyone tried to rename the day. The rumor faded into the sound of chairs being straightened for the next hour. Paper had done what paper does when given a straight path and a little light. Morning carried the quiet of rooms that held their breath overnight. The venue's portal showed a new seating chart with a small, careful edit. A single blank square on the bride's side had turned the color of a placeholder. No name yet. Not an apology. A notch in a wall where light could pass. The change was subtle enough to slip under noise and firm enough to signal thought. The coordinator's log contained a line that had not existed yesterday. It recorded receipt of a binder labeled context, noted a second copy secured in the office, and linked both to the gate stamp. The chain of custody read like a spine. The rumor about threats had nowhere to root inside a ledger that preferred facts to feelings. Paper had gained a voice without raising its tone. I in the photo proofs from rehearsal. A fig leaf framed a clear sleeve on a table set for schedules. The sleeve reflected light at an angle that revealed the first page beneath it. The grandmother's handwriting sat inside that reflected frame like a quiet cornerstone. Images tame arguments in rooms that run on impressions. This one fixed an object to the day in a way no speech could undo. The father's crowd pivoted to newer tactics. The revised prints lost their ink under a stack of vendor invoices. The extra tote traded places with a crate that actually belonged. Two names on a staff sheet shifted rows, and then shifted back in a span of minutes that looked like a mistake if you did not love patterns. The noise had not learned to be quiet. It had learned to move faster. I checked the bank stamp on the certification page I had added at the last minute. The fresh date carried the weight of time aligned with the present. Old documents can be dismissed as history. Current ones refuse that exit. I slid a slim copy of the certification into the coordinator's folder with an index tab that matched the binder's spine. The habit of pairing things turned proof into a net that caught small changes without strain. The portal posted new rehearsal photos before lunch. In one, my daughter stood under the fig tree with her back to the camera, veil tucked into a casual bun, binder open at a shallow angle. The crease on the letter's corner had deepened into a line. An index card peeked from under the sleeve by a finger's width. The room in the image felt steady. The day forward would test whether steadiness could be taught to people who prefer momentum to truth. That MY phone carried no invitation and no plea. It held a single notification from the venue's document system. Material reviewed, no action required. Systems rarely use kindness. They prefer clarity. The message meant the object had reached eyes that could weigh it. Everything after that would be choice, not logistics. Afternoon bloomed into the practical list that always appeared 2 days before ceremonies. Linen counts, weather checks, backup power tests. At the bottom of a shared note, an unmarked entry reported a minor access restriction on a private office where unofficial items had pooled yesterday. The restriction had a range and an end time and a person's initials that did not belong to the father's side. Rails quietly placed themselves back on their sleepers. The coordinator asked the officiant to confirm receipt of legal names and family acknowledgments. A field labeled parental recognition held 2 lines instead of 1. No titles, no explanations. 2 lines meant the ceremony would not pretend a whole life could be told with 1. Forms carry delicacy when you ask the right of them. I prepared the next step without words. A thin, sealed packet with the grandmother's letter photocopy, the 1-page index, and the certification sat inside an envelope addressed to the officiant with a neutral cover. It did not argue for inclusion. It ensured no part of the truth would be lost to misplaced assumptions about who stands where and why. The packet would travel with tomorrow's lyric sheets and the stack of vows that venues collect and never read. The father's car arrived late, shine intact, orbit noisy. He traced the same loop around desks and doors with the same gravity that bends rules. The loop met a locked drawer and a logged cart instead of unguarded surfaces. Speed slowed against steel and ink. Loudness leaked away into errands that did not touch the table under the fig tree. Control exhausts itself when it cannot find purchase. Evening settled across the hill in stages that matched the light. The wind carried a cleaner scent through the archway where flowers had been heavy the day before. The binder stayed off the main floor, but inside the chain of custody, like a book returned to the right shelf. The duplicate in the office kept the same quiet shape as always. The system was not on my side. It was on the side of its own rails. I had spent months learning how to lay rails in small rooms. This larger one had finally remembered its own that I left without leaving anything loose behind me. The receipt stayed in my wallet. The digital log saved to 2 secure addresses. The officiant's envelope waited in a tote labeled scripts in a desk that recorded keys. Nothing in my hands begged. Everything in my hands stayed steady. Tomorrow would bring a ceremony, a lens, and 100 eyes trained to read surfaces. I had built a path below them that did not depend on applause. The day before the ceremony wore a thin calm that felt engineered. The venue's portal refreshed with small edits that mattered more than they looked. A weather contingency appeared where there had been a blank field. A line for family acknowledgments kept both spaces open. The placeholder square beside my daughter's name remained the soft color of a seat not yet claimed. The system held its breath without losing its shape. An MY phone showed short notes from shared lists that never addressed me but revealed temperature. A reminder to bring comfortable shoes. A request for tissues at the front row. A line about extra water under the arch. The words were ordinary and gave away nothing, yet the absence of noise from the corners that had tried to swell yesterday said enough. A room that wants to be honest starts with small logistics that stop lying. I visited a copy center and made one last slim set. The index card. The certification page. The first paragraph of the grandmother's letter. The pack fit into a thin envelope labeled for the stage manager. If the binder missed the light again, the stage would not. Paper finds its way if you give it 3 doors and ask none of them for favors. Back at the venue, rails showed themselves in quiet markers. Badges scanned with clean beeps instead of waved hands. Crates carried their own labels and matched ledgers without argument. The office drawer that had swallowed unofficial items yesterday now bore a tag with 2 initials not owned by the father's side. The tone of the room had shifted from display to service. Rooms that serve do not hide as well as rooms that perform. The father's circle mounted one more attempt that traded volume for erosion. A new courtesy program appeared on a printer tray with soft blur at the bottom margins where names would live. The blur swallowed any line that did not fit the preferred version of the story. The stack tried to migrate to the table near the aisle. It met a staffer who asked for a file name and a sign-off. The blur had neither. It folded back into a box without a fight. Proof that even noise knows when it has lost ground. I walked the exterior path that guests would follow, noting where cameras caught the flow and where shadows made corners. A bench by a hedge offered a view of the first row without placing a body in it. If my square stayed a placeholder tomorrow, I would sit there and let the ceremony write itself over air. The binder would do the talking I had avoided for years. A person can hold silence with dignity if the truth nearby carries weight. The officiant's desk accepted the sealed packet with the same indifference that keeps ceremonies on time. The envelope joined scripts and vows and a small toolkit of clips and pins. The list beside it showed legal names spelled correctly, the way a form insists when people are tempted to tell stories instead of facts. Nothing in that drawer depended on me. That was the point. The portal posted a final rehearsal photo near dusk. My daughter stood beneath soft lighting with a page in her hands and a crease across her brow that I recognized from exams and recitals. The fig tree did not appear in this frame. The table did not either. Only hands and paper and the posture of a person weighing weight. The image closed with her head lifted, not bowed. I let the sight settle in my bones that I checked my door plan in case the gate held firm against me tomorrow. The bench by the hedge. The stage manager's packet. The coordinator's duplicate. The chain of custody in 3 places. A neighbor on call to collect the binder after the ceremony if needed, to keep it close to the person it belongs to and far from hands that prefer drawers to daylight. Redundancy lowers blood pressure better than hope. Night stretched across the hill and leveled the edges that had cut all week. I placed the receipt in my wallet, the logs in a cloud with a key only I use, and my hands flat on the table until my breathing matched the room. The version of the story that had kept me outside was running out of scaffolding. It might still win attention. It could not win paperwork. The hardest part about a quiet truth is trusting it to do its job. When eyes arrived, I slept in a plain shirt and shoes by the bed. The morning would ask for presence, not costume. If my name never printed on a square, I would still be there, steady as a post set in concrete years ago. A parent's work does not start with an aisle, and it does not end with a seat. It lives where signatures make gaps invisible to the child who walks between them. The gate opened to a morning that smelled like damp stone and cut stems. The scanner blinked its small green eye and logged my name without ceremony. The desk ledger held the same even hand I had watched all week. A thin folder moved from a drawer to a tray marked stage, and the system clicked into place with the soft confidence of rails finding their line. The aisle space learned its light while chairs settled into their rows. Programs arrived in neat bundles with crisp edges and no blur at the margins. Inside, a line for family acknowledgments carried two names set in the same type. No titles, no hierarchy. It was not an apology. It was a placement. Paper carried the choice without using my voice. The first row wore calm. A single ribbon marked a seat that had been a blank square yesterday. It read reserved in small letters, not my name, not a dare. A hedge bench still offered a view, and a breath later the decision was simple. I took the bench and let the ribbon do the speaking. Presence works best when it does not crowd the frame. The officiant's materials sat on a podium that did not compete with flowers. A sealed envelope lay open beside a stack of vows. Its contents merged into the script with the quiet care that keeps ceremonies human. The order of service held a new sentence near the beginning. It did not explain history. It protected dignity. Words succeeded because they were few and placed where a breath naturally falls. Cameras swept their arcs from discreet stands. One lens found the fig tree. Another slid along the aisle lip to hold faces as they arrive. A third framed the podium and the first row together, enough to catch a ribbon and a hand and a page turned by a person who had read before she spoke. Images did what I could not risk with sound. The father's orbit made its entrance with polish and pace. His people tested boundaries with small trespasses that had worked elsewhere. A box reached the podium and retreated when asked for a sign-off number it did not have. A stack of personal programs with soft blur at the bottom never left its tote. A whispered plan to change the seat card at the last minute met a clip and a note on a clipboard that refused to wink. The aisle filled with the ordinary wonder of a crowd watching one of their own step into new vows. I held the bench and time held me. The moment that mattered arrived without fanfare. The officiant lifted the page that had traveled through 3 steady hands and gave the room a single line about gratitude to those who raised and steadied. It was not a plea for applause. It was a sentence that made a road wide enough for truth to pass without tripping that a camera blinked its small red light and fixed the line forever. The ribbon in the first row did not move. The father's jaw set in the way of men who feel the script slide sideways under polished shoes. His eyes sought the assistant and found only rails. The aisle did not give him room to rearrange a line everyone had already heard. The processional smoothed into vows, and the air changed density. The story I had carried on paper for years now lived in the day as texture rather than argument. I watched my daughter's face lift into light that belonged to her alone. The binder was nowhere in sight, and everywhere in effect. Proof had done its work by becoming background. Just before the signing, a small ripple reached the podium. A hand delivered a 1-page insert with the same soft blur from yesterday. It tried to revise the acknowledgments with a flourish of new phrasing. The stage manager lifted it, checked the file name, and slid it into a folder that records attempts. The podium stayed clean. The camera stayed on. The sound of the pens on paper was the loudest thing in the world. When the recessional began, the ribbon slipped free and drifted like a quiet flag. The bench held the impression of my weight and nothing else. The day had accepted a version of us that did not erase. The crowd moved toward light and music. And somewhere behind that movement, a plan that had depended on noise began looking for a new place to land. The reception floor opened like a map of soft light and polished wood. The cameras shifted from aisles to tables and learned new arcs. Programs lay on plates like folded birds. The official stack showed clean edges and the same 2 lines inside. A second stack with the soft blur tried to migrate again. It reached a server's station and stopped under a note that asked for a file name. Paper without lineage does not travel far. The stage manager logged each song cue and announcement with times that stitched the evening into a seam. A copy of the acknowledgments page sat on the clipboard with a quiet watermark from the venue printer. The watermark became a gate. Any page without it turned away at the podium and joined the folder that records attempts. The folder grew heavier by a thin breath at a time. Photo booths caught more than confetti. Guests held up programs and centerpieces for the lens. The camera's eye fixed the clean version in 100 casual frames. Images born by accident became a spine the way ledger stamps had earlier. The blur stack shrank without hands ever touching it. People do not pocket counterfeits when the real thing sits inches away. I walked the perimeter with the calm pace of a person who belongs to no table and every rail. Staff badges pinged at doors. Bottles arrived on carts that matched invoices. The office drawer with the logged key stayed shut through the hour when shortcuts usually bloom. The loop that had relied on distraction met a night trained to notice. The father's circle adapted the way weather does when a front fails. A toast draft appeared on a napkin with lines that bent truth into a smile. It reached the DJ booth and found a typed set with signatures. A memory montage materialized on a tablet and met a projector that would only accept files from the manager's drive. The room preferred rails to improv, a choice that keeps days from breaking under their own joy. Near the cake table, the photographer lifted a long lens and caught the ribbon from the first row tied now around a bouquet. The knot turned presence into artifact. It did not ask for a seat or a name. It sat in the frame that would outlive the chatter around it. Proof, once set, does not require volume. I checked the document portal while music softened at the edges and waited for speeches. The officiant had posted a simple note that acknowledgments were delivered as written. The log showed the one-page insert with blur tagged as declined and stored with other non-compliant materials. The system did not scold. It simply kept a record. Records outlast narratives that depend on breath. Late in the evening, a last attempt surfaced where shadows gather behind staging. A box of programs with blank bottoms tried to replace the clean stack as guests drifted to the exit. The swap reached for darkness and missed light that had learned to stand where exits live. A coordinator lifted both stacks, weighed them against the ledger, and set the real one by the door with a small sign that said "Take one." The false stack returned to the folder that keeps misfires. I sealed the chain without stepping into any frame. A copy of the portal log saved to my key. A still from the aisle camera marked with the moment the two lines were read. A scan of the ribbon now tied around flowers. A photo of the official program opened to the acknowledgments. 4 points fixed a square around the day and left no side unguarded. The binder had taught me this geometry. The venue had supplied the rulers. When the lights dimmed to signal an end, I stood at the hedge bench and let sound pass through me without catching. The crowd thinned into small trails of perfume and laughter. Staff lifted stacks, rolled carts, counted glasses. The folder of attempts closed with a low click. The ribbon around the bouquet glowed like a thin line of dawn in a room that had finally stopped trying to become theater that I left through the same gate that had stamped my name that morning. The scanner blinked once, green and calm. The ledger added a departure time with the same even hand as the entry. Outside, the air felt like stone cooling after sun. The version of me that had stayed quiet for years remained quiet. Only now the quiet belonged to ground that did not shift underfoot. Morning brought the kind of light that settles ideas instead of stirring them. The venue's portal closed its files with a short notice that the event was archived. The watermark on the acknowledgments page appeared beside a date and a small lock icon. The day had entered a ledger that does not forget. I prepared a slim envelope with a copy of the index, the certification page, and the first paragraph of the grandmother's letter. The packet was small enough to fit in a makeup bag and strong enough to hold its shape for years. I wrote no message inside. Paper carries itself when the time is right. The delivery did not need an aisle or a hallway. A trusted hand from the coordinator's office delivered it to a dresser in a quiet room where hairpins still rested. A simple log line recorded the transfer. The system did not praise me. It did something better. It made the truth ordinary that I walked the exterior path one last time. The hedge bench stood empty and clean. A stray petal held the ribbon's crease where it had been tied to flowers. Small evidence outlives noise because it is not trying to be seen. It simply remains. The father's car left early, shine intact, orbit thinner. The assistant moved without a tote. The folder that recorded attempts sat in a drawer with a label that would outlast moods. I did not open it. Some files exist only to remind people where rails a are. At home, I slid the original binder into the box on the top shelf. The receipt from the gate stayed in my wallet until its paper softened. The digital logs went into cold storage with a name that meant nothing to anyone but me. The work shifted from defense to maintenance. That is how a story changes shape. That a note appeared on the portal a day later. It was not for me. It thanked staff for accuracy and care. It mentioned nothing about families and everything about operations. The tone felt like fresh air after a long room. Systems improve when people see how they behave under light. Weeks turned into calmer lists. The ribbon found a place inside a book on my shelf. The bouquet dried into a quiet sculpture that did not beg for attention. My phone stayed free of statements and storms. Silence finally felt like a choice I had made, not a corner someone had kept me in. One afternoon, a small photograph arrived in my mail. No return address. A single frame from the ceremony. 2 lines in the program visible over a hand. A crease on a page that had traveled far to get there. The image did not change the past. It anchored it. I kept living in the narrow, steady way that holds a roof up. Bills paid on time. Meals planned without drama. Calls answered when they mattered. Love measured in unremarkable acts that keep other people from seeing the ground move. The version of me that had been called names no longer needed to reply. The day had replied for me. If questions ever rise later, the packet will meet them without speeches. If they never do, the truth will still exist where it belongs, filed, witnessed, available. My seat at the ceremony was a bench by a hedge. My place in the story is a spine that holds even when no one is looking. Thank you for watching this story on True Tales Hub. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss our next story. That we post new tales twice a day, and each one comes with unexpected twists you won't see coming.